Welcome to this explainer. I am so thrilled you're here. Look, today we're strapping in and exploring a wild chain reaction. We're going to map out exactly how massive global power shifts, international conflicts, and, major institutional shakeups are literally trickling all the way down to your personal bank account. So let's just dive right into this because the sheer scale of the butterfly effect we're seeing right now in the global economy, it's absolutely incredible.
3.8%. That's the startling spike in consumer prices we saw this April compared to a year earlier. It marks the highest jump in 3 whole years. But listen, this isn't just some random economic hiccup. No, this is a direct, tangible consequence of global conflicts, specifically the war with Iran. It's choking off supply chains and sending shockwaves right to our store shelves and our gas pumps.
And hey, the financial shocks, they aren't just hitting everyday consumers. $10 billion. That is the staggering maximum potential fine currently hanging over Synergy Marine. They're the operator of the container ship that took down the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. It's a pretty stark reminder of the massive financial stakes tied up in our global infrastructure and shipping networks.
But these pressures are actually flipping traditional industries completely upside down. 40%. That is the massive tuition discount now being offered on traditional MBAs by top-tier institutions, places like Purdue University. As economic anxiety rises, the entire education landscape is frantically reshaping itself. Seriously, people are rethinking the value of absolutely everything.
Section 1. Shifting Global Power Dynamics. The Beijing Summit.
So, a decade after President Trump's last visit, China is greeting the U.S. with a seriously emboldened geopolitical stance. They've fundamentally fortified their position. They now boast the world's largest naval fleet, a growing nuclear arsenal capable of striking the U.S. from land, sea, or air, and a fortress China strategy. They've aggressively poured hundreds of billions into homegrown tech just to resist American tariffs.
So, what are both sides actually trying to achieve here? Well, the United States is looking for concrete economic and geopolitical wins. We're talking large-scale purchases of U.S. soybeans and Boeing aircraft, and crucially, using Beijing's leverage to help end the war in Iran. On the flip side, China is dealing with a domestic economic slump and sticky deflation, so they're seeking economic predictability, an end to tariff threats, and, significantly, a reduction in U.S. military support for Taiwan.
Section 2. Domestic Crises and Accountability. The Cost of Infrastructure.
Now, zooming in to the domestic side. The 2024 collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore was a profound tragedy that killed 6 construction workers. But beyond that devastating human toll, it was a catastrophic economic event. Just by blocking the 700-foot-wide channel of the Port of Baltimore for nearly 11 weeks, this incident alone caused an estimated $5 billion in economic losses. $5 billion! It further tangled up the maritime traffic that our entire economy relies on.
But what's really fascinating, and frankly deeply concerning, is the intense pursuit of legal accountability on U.S. soil following this disaster. The Justice Department has actually filed criminal charges against the ship's operator, tracing the collapse back to a very specific, alleged sequence. First, a loose wire in a high-voltage switchboard caused an initial power loss. Okay, but then the DOJ alleges the operators made improper, hazardous alterations to the ship's backup systems, and that directly led to a second, fatal blackout. Prosecutors are saying that had the generators used the proper fuel supply pumps, the ship would have regained power in time to avoid the bridge entirely. Wow!
Section 3. The Macroeconomic Squeeze. Trickle-down Pressures.
So let's connect the dots. Here's the stark math problem facing everyday Americans right now. For the first time since April 2023, inflation is officially outstripping wage growth. While hourly wages grew by a respectable 3.6% year-over-year in April, the Consumer Price Index jumped ahead to 3.8%. So, your paycheck might technically be bigger, but your actual purchasing power, it's shrinking.
And if you want to know exactly where that purchasing power is vanishing, well, look no further than the pump. The specific pain points causing this squeeze are heavily tied to energy. Amid the ongoing conflict with Iran and disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz, gasoline prices jumped 28% from a year earlier. And fuel oil? It surged a staggering 54%. That energy spike alone accounts for more than 40% of the month-to-month increase in inflation. It's huge.
Joseph Bruce Willis, the chief economist at RSM, puts it pretty bluntly. He says the American economy has entered a new chapter where inflation appears to have stepped up. That's a stark reality check. He's predicting the headline rate will move to 4% later this year. The big takeaway for us here is that these higher prices aren't just a blip.
No, they're likely here to stay, fundamentally altering how families are going to have to budget for the second half of the year.
Section 4. Adopting to the future. Demographics and education.
Now, pivoting a bit, there is some genuinely surprising data coming out of the New York Fed. When we think of student loan defaults, we usually picture, recent graduates. But right now, the average student loan defaulter is nearly 40 years old. Actually, even more shocking, the 50 and older demographic, Generation X, is now at the absolute highest risk of default. A lot of these borrowers are parents who took out loans for their kids, and under the current economic squeeze we just talked about, they simply can't keep up with the resumed payments.
This kind of financial anxiety is bleeding directly into how people view higher education today. With budgets tight and the looming threat of artificial intelligence disrupting basically entire industries, the demand for traditional two-year degrees is dramatically softening. People are terrified of stepping out of the workforce for 2 years, only to find their chosen field has been completely altered by AI by the time they graduate.
Which really leads us to pose a critical question. Is the traditional MBA obsolete? Think about it. Experts are noting a massive shift from job hopping to job hugging. In a shaky environment, professionals are clinging tightly to their current roles rather than risking the time and massive expense of taking 2 whole years off just to explore a generalized business degree.
And universities are kind of panicking to fill those empty seats. They're using aggressive sales tactics. Elite institutions are literally putting their degrees on a fire sale. Purdue is knocking 40% off its tuition. UC Irvine is cutting tuition by up to 38% for its flexible programs. Johns Hopkins, they're offering 50% scholarships for certain master's programs. They are desperately trying to adapt to a workforce that no longer wants a 2-year hiatus, but instead demands quick, flexible, AI-focused upskilling that isn't going to leave them drowning in debt.
Section 5. Rapid-fire updates, policy, and politics. All right, let's do a quick structural overview. At the federal level, we are seeing some significant turnover and tension. FDA Chief Marty Makary has officially resigned following months of policy clashes with the Health and Human Services Department. Over at the FBI, Director Kash Patel faced some highly heated congressional hearings defending his leadership amidst allegations of misconduct and controversial staff firings. And at ICE, the administration tapped David Venturella, a former private prison executive known for advocating a more basic enforcement approach, as the new acting director.
Meanwhile, in the corporate and civic spheres, PayPal has agreed to forego about $30 million in transaction fees to settle a DOJ probe regarding its funding programs for minority-owned businesses. Internationally, Sweden is making waves by fundamentally shifting away from its cradle-to-grave state model. Nearly half of its primary healthcare clinics are now privately owned. And, right in New York City, Mayor Zohar Mamdani has officially backed down from his highly criticized proposal to impose a broad property tax hike on all homeowners, pivoting instead to a targeted tax on second homes worth over $5 million.
Which brings us to our final thought for the day. We've seen how global tensions raise the price of your gas, how infrastructure failures disrupt your goods, and how inflation is literally forcing elite colleges to discount their degrees. So I leave you with this. How will you, as part of the modern workforce, build resilience against these skyrocketing costs while simultaneously outcompeting the unstoppable rise of AI? It really is the defining economic strategy question of our time. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep adapting, and I'll see you next time.